never seen the Middle East in such turmoil as it is now, and I see no hope. I often say to people who want to hear about the light at the end of the tunnel, when you realize and fully accept there is absolutely no hope at the moment, then you can begin to construct something that will create hope. But the false idea, we're winning in Iraq, now we're going to win in Afghanistan, for heaven's sakes. You know, I call it in my paper Iraqistan. You know, we went to Afghanistan, we won the war, then we went to Iraq, we won the war, now we're going back to Afghanistan to win the war again. And no doubt later we'll have to go back to Iraq, or we'll be going to Pakistan then to sort that out. Endless war. You know, I think one of the reasons why there is such frustration and anger among Muslim people, and I say this frankly because I feel it and I hear it. You know, I live among Muslims, and my driver's a Sunni Muslim, my classical Arabic translators are Shiite, my landlords are Druze. My optician is a Christian. I think that part of the reason for the frustrations is that Muslim people, by and large, have not lost their faith. They still believe in God. And we as Westerners largely have lost our faith. Not all, I know. There's still a few around, Midwest, and we've even got a few in England. They go to churches. You can spot them every so often, Sunday mornings. But by and large, I think we've lost our faith. We believe, perhaps because of the Renaissance, perhaps because of the Age of Enlightenment, because we believe in secular values and human rights, we've put these more important than how we came to be here. And I think part of this frustration that exists in the Middle East is because Muslims ask themselves how they who have kept the faith and still believe in God should be dominated politically, socially, culturally, and militarily by people who do not believe in God anymore. I always remember Tariq Aziz standing next to James Baker in 1991, just before the outbreak of the 91 Gulf War, saying, 18 million Iraqis cannot be defeated by a computer. But he was. They were defeated by a computer. By our power, our technology, our will, our guts, if you like, the West has dominated the Muslim world. And how? You know, it was a baker in Baghdad who asked me a question, which of course I hadn't thought of asking in my newspaper. He said, tell me, Mr. Robert, why are you, by you he meant you Western military people, why are you in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, French air base in Dushanbe and Tajik capital, flies close air support to British troops in Helmand province and Kandahar in Afghanistan. Why are you going into Pakistan? Why are you in Afghanistan? Why are you in Iraq? Why are you in Turkey? Why do you have US forces in Jordan and Egypt and Algeria? US special forces have a base near Tamanrasset in the Algerian southern Sahara. Why are you in Oman and Yemen and Qatar and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia? And I had no reply. I hadn't thought about that. You know, it's like there's an iron curtain. In fact, it stretches Greenland, Iceland, US forces in the United Kingdom, Germany, of course, where the Brits still are, Bosnia now, Camp Bondsteel, and Greece, and that joins up with Turkey. From the ice cap almost to the equator, we have a new iron curtain, bigger and more powerful than the one that Winston Churchill spoke of in this country, that stretched from the Baltic to Trieste and the Adriatic. Why is it there? What's behind it? Russia, China, India? Why are we in the Muslim world without armed forces? It doesn't belong to us. You know, I calculated for our Sunday magazine of The Independent a couple of years ago that we now have, per head of population, 22 times as many Western military personnel in the Muslim world than the Crusaders had in the 12th century. And we are surprised at the conflict in which we're all embroiled today. I don't believe in the clash of civilizations. I think that Huntington's book was the material that comes out of the rear end of a bull, or however you have to put it in radio stations in the United States. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, I gave a talk in Manhattan very close to the site of the World Trade Center not that long afterwards, in which I said I was surprised that Muslims have been restrained towards us for so long. In 1992, I made a movie for Channel 4 television in Britain and for the Discovery Channel here in the States called Beirut to Bosnia. It was real film, I mean 35mm. We showed it in cinemas as well, called Beirut to Bosnia. And it was said to be an inquiry, why are Muslims coming to hate us in the West? And at one scene, I walk into a mosque which is on fire in Bosnia. And you can hear my voice on the soundtrack. This is 1992, and I say, when I see things like this, I wonder what the Muslim world has in store for us. The New York Times derided this as being sensationalist. When I was writing my previous book, The Great War for Civilization, I went back to all the rough cuts of this film and discovered that I walked into the mosque on the 11th of September 1992. I was 9 years out. I don't think we can really be prescient about these things, but I felt something was coming. I actually, when I was researching for the book, went back through all the interviews I'd done on TV in the States and elsewhere. I found that in 1999, I did a broadcast at the beginning of the year on CBC live in Toronto, in which I say, and I don't remember saying it, but I've seen the tape. The interviewer is saying, but surely things are getting better in the Middle East. Israel has peace with Egypt, it has peace with Jordan, Israel's security and peace being the sort of linchpin for the whole Middle East. And I said, no, things are getting worse. There's going to be an explosion soon, I said. And I've run that tape back. What did I mean? I don't even remember saying it, but we were feeling it coming. It was out there. We had this knowledge. And I think that in the past, people were more prescient. They thought more about this. Before 24-hour television, you know, will we get Saddam's capture on the prime time tonight? That's great. We've got a press conference, Mr. President. Mr. Prime Minister Blair, there's a press conference at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. What are we going to say? This is how we run our politics now. You know, this is why we have no plans for Iraq after occupation. You know, Winston Churchill, he's not a hero of mine. My PhD thesis was on Churchill and Ireland, and he didn't look a very nice guy if he was sitting in Dublin in World War II. But Churchill appointed a cabinet committee early in 1941, 4 years before the end of the Second World War, before Nazi Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union in August of 41, Operation Barbarossa, when the Wehrmacht was still on the coast of France and we were still expecting German invasion. He set up a cabinet committee to organize the government of post-war occupied Nazi Germany. The following year, Cambridge University began degree courses for British diplomats to govern Germany. 4 years before the end of the war. We didn't have a proper plan. Well, the State Department had one, and Rumsfeld had effectively torn it up when we crossed the Tigris River in April of 2003. Why didn't we do this? What did we do wrong? Why didn't we plan for the future? You know, I was talking to a CIA officer in Kufa in a Spanish camp before the Spanish left after the Madrid bombings. He came up to me one evening and a huge pistol in his hip. So tell me, Bob, what did we do wrong? He said, well, I said, when you got to Baghdad, you could have set up a huge tent hospital city and said, come, all your masses and your poor, we will heal you and look after your wounds and protect you. We didn't do that. We didn't care about Iraqis. We still don't care about Iraqis. How many Iraqis have been killed in the war? We haven't the slightest idea. Anyone here who can name an Iraqi, and there may be one or two, who's been killed since 2003, name him, put up your hand. Okay, there's one. I can put up a hand too. That's it too. We don't care. But you can look in your paper this morning. You know, what is the figure now? 4,176, is it? The number of American dead. We know their ages, what unit they come from, their names, whether they're married, how many children they've got. We care about us, but we don't care about them. I said to the CIA guy, you know, you might take a leaf out of the Romans, forgetting crucifixion for the moment. Every time the Romans occupied a country, they made all the people citizens of Rome. I said, if we loved the Iraqis, why don't we make them citizens of America and Britain? And they wouldn't all pile on the next plane to JFK. They'd be proud to feel that we loved them and we wanted them and that we'd come for them. Always we go to the Middle East with our horses and our M1A1 Abrams tanks and our swords and our Apache helicopters and our Humvees, and we want to give the Muslims more democracy or some democracy, their dictators mostly having been appointed by us, and in many cases, of course, people like Saddam. And we offer them some packages of human rights from our supermarket shelves. And I think they'd like some of that. But I think they want a different kind of freedom. I think they want freedom from us. And this we do not intend to give them. I'm talking about prescience and things like this, but I'll quote you a little bit of Winston Churchill. Here is Winston Churchill talking in 1937. On the 23rd of July, he wrote an essay in 1937. Remember, this is 11 years before the Nakba, the Palestinian disaster, 11 years before Israel's War of Independence. And he was talking about how the wealthy, crowded, progressive Jewish state will lie in the plains and on the seacoast of Palestine. Around it, in the hills and the uplands, stretching far and wide into the illimitable deserts, the warlike Arabs of Syria, Transjordania, and Arabia, backed by the armed forces of Iraq, offer the ceaseless menace of war. To maintain itself, the Jewish state must be armed to the teeth and must bring in every able-bodied man to strengthen its army. But how long would this process be allowed to continue by the great Arab populations in Iraq and Palestine? Can it be expected that the Arabs will stand by impassively and watch the building up with Jewish capital and resources of a Jewish army equipped with the most deadly weapons of war until it was strong enough not to be afraid of them? This is 1937. And if ever the Jewish army reached that point, who can be sure that cramped within their narrow limits, they would not plunge out into the new undeveloped lands that lie around them? This was 30 years before the 1967 war. This guy looked ahead. We don't, not even in our journalism. Here's Churchill, who's gone on holiday to Morocco in 1936. Churchill, these were the wilderness years when he was out of power and everyone mocked him because he didn't believe in appeasement. He was constantly telling the British government, you need to rearm, Hitler is going to attack. But he was in Morocco on holiday, and he was talking about how, it was under French rule then, of course, as was Tunisia and tragically Algeria as well. And he was talking about how, there were modern hospitals, new roads, telephones. And he's writing, actually, an article in the Daily Express. It's a little bit flowery. The Arab inhabitants are a perpetual attraction with their flowing, many-coloured robes. Every peasant is a picture, every crowd a pageant. He's in journalistic mode, you see. If winter sunshine is the quest, here is its achievement. But then he goes on, thus far all smiles. Is there a darker underside? The Arabs are a proud and ancient race, till only yesterday a race of conquerors. Are they tamed? Are they reconciled to this new civilization with its order, its efficiency, its many benefits, its proofs of active progress, and its sense of effort? Or are they dreaming of the days of Arab greatness? The faith of Islam holds them all in a discipline of its own. From the balcony of my up-to-date hotel, I heard all night long the chants and drumbeats of the mosques, an endless repetition of choruses in which war and religion have an equal part. Who shall plumb the future? Ouch, as I always write when I find clippings like this. This guy was talking about Islamicism before we even dreamt of it. When I go back and think, when I went to the Middle East 32 years ago, more than half my life ago, all our enemies, I put our in quotes, and will include Israel as an honorary member of the West. All our enemies were secular, socialist, leftist, pro-Soviet. The People's Popular Republic of, which was never belonging to the people, it was never popular, they weren't republics, but the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, General Command, Democratic Front for the Liberation of... All these people were nationalist, leftist, secular. But today, all, quote, our enemies, unquote, are Islamist. Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, the Taliban. Why did this happen? Do we not realize this change has occurred? And we are in their countries. We are on their land. I believe that our military must leave the entire Muslim world. We must have the strongest relations politically, culturally, socially, religious. Flood it with our tourists. They'd love to see us. They're not anti-us. But we must get out because these places do not belong to us. I was giving a talk in Dublin, Ireland a few weeks ago, and a colleague of mine who was a sort of anchor man beside me in our lecture, Vincent Brown, who was a colleague of mine in Northern Ireland, but he's actually a Southern Catholic. He said, but surely, Robert, isn't Islam a threat to us? And I said, oh, really, Vincent? You mean the Egyptian army is in Dublin? You mean the Syrians are in London, or the Jordanian army is in Washington? We just don't realize where we are and what we're doing. And nor do we tell you. Because of our cliches, because of our fear of offending either side, particularly the Israelis in the Middle East, because we're frightened of being called anti-Semitic, which is a grotesque slander against any decent person who dares to criticize Israel. I think that people who use the word anti-Semitism in this way will make anti-Semitism respectable, and shame upon them for doing it. There are real anti-Semites out there, and we should all be against them, not falsely using this word against decent people. But we don't tell you the truth. We don't get it across. And we don't even write well. I'm going to read you a couple of extracts from a letter sent home by a US Marine in Fallujah. I have permission to read this to you. Written to his dad. Shortly after he wrote this, he was quite badly wounded by an IED, improvised explosive device, a bomb beside the road, but he recovered and he's okay. And he's talking here about trying to get Iraqis to run the local government in Ramadi, next to Fallujah. We are trying to, he writes with an eloquence I can't compete with. I don't agree with all he says, but listen to the way he writes. We're trying to empower the Iraqis to walk alongside the Marines, but the graft has not yet taken. There is something culturally childish in their understanding of basic Western governance and management that will require immeasurable education and probably several generations to overcome if they find it of any interest. That education is, of course, a choice that they have to make on their own. They are not our people. Our understanding of their tribal governance and its relationship to formal civic management is equally naive and charges our frustration. The problem now is that their every inconvenience has become our responsibility. You're an occupation, right? They act as if they cannot comprehend our sacrifices and are thus ungrateful for them. The reality is that they cannot culturally comprehend our altruism or believe our stated intentions. Even though it is not in their desire to offend, we are insulted and it bleeds us of affection and tolerance. Liberation will compete with invasion as our legacy, but locally we are ideologically irrelevant. Liberation will compete with invasion as our legacy. It is a region of people making alliances, business deals, friendships and enemies one day at a time, without a real concept of sustainable services, resources or trust. No future, just daily survival as they know it. Family and tribe. Our contributions may be counted long after we have withdrawn, but they will not recount the names of our fallen, so many now. Each wound will be absorbed into the quiet sadness that we allow to pass beneath us as a people and a country. Our loss will never even have occurred to most people here. And if you think he doesn't have a sense of humour, here he is discussing actual local government and elections in Ramadi. He's writing to his dad, remember. So what news about the new government, you may ask? Well, the provisional military governor was replaced by the transitional governor, who resigned under threat and was replaced with another transitional governor. He was then replaced by the emergency appointed governor, who was just replaced by the selected governor chosen by the elected provincial council. He never made a speech or publicised his views, never debated the other candidates, and was not present during the selection, never making an acceptance speech. He was promptly kidnapped by a rival tribe, while his tribe fought another tribe on the Syrian border. The recently displaced emergency-appointed governor returned in hopes of regaining his position. However, the deputy governor is now serving as the acting governor, while the actual selected governor is in captivity. But there was an election, so democracy is in full bloom, I am to understand. You've got to feel sorry for this guy, apart from the fact that he writes like Joseph Conrad. We are now trying to force the power of decision onto the elected provincial council and the city. It is difficult. It is a difficult thing to keep myself inactive in matters of governance here. The instinct to impose order and command the requisite discipline in the Iraqi leadership must be quelled in order to allow sovereign stewardship to develop at its native pace and in a native form. I fight myself to remain insignificant in the process. I haven't the nature for passive observation. I share the American fascination with action, and it has consistently betrayed us in our foreign policy. Our continued involvement will continue the state of dependency, and our eventual departure will leave nothing but cosmetic structure here. Iraq will return to what it is. Our common sense is not common to this people, and that understanding must be given proper respect. I do my best, but I twitch with an urge for the folly of intrusion. You won't read that in your Seattle newspaper or your San Francisco Chronicle or your LA Times or your New York Times. How come you won't? How come this is an ordinary soldier who can write with such eloquence and get the truth out, and we don't tell you about it? There's a major problem here. How are we going to get out of Iraq? I don't mean how we're going to tell the world. We'll concoct some treaty that will allow us to run away in some form. But how are you going to be told? And how is the military or the administration, whoever forms it after tonight's debate, or the British for that matter, how are we as civilians going to be, how's it going to explain to us of why we've got to get out of Iraq after mission accomplished and all this tremendous success? You know, I've been an astute reader of the American press for a long time. I found that about 2 years ago, the letters columns of little local papers, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. How many people here have been to Cedar Rapids, by the way? Yes, I'm sorry about it anyway. I thought it was full of mountains and waterfalls, you know. It's mile after mile of wet beet fields and railroad yards. But anyway, in these little towns and in Denver and places like that, I found the letters columns were coming up with letters from readers like, why are we still in Iraq trying to teach these people who don't want the benefits of our civilization and dying for them? Right? And two articles I picked up. One was the New York Times, David Brooks, And at the same time, the same day as USA Today, this is not an advertisement for the New York Times, whose coverage of the Middle East, in my view, is incomprehensible, and USA Today, which I even more suggest you don't read, David Brooks has been reading about the British occupation of Iraq in 1920. At last, I mean, he didn't read it before the invasion, but he's getting around to it now. The British tried to encourage responsible Iraqi self-government to no avail. Well, that's true enough. Today, Iraq is in much worse shape, complete social disintegration. But it is exacerbated by the same old Iraqi demons, greed, bloodlust, and a mind-boggling unwillingness to compromise for the common good, even in the face of self-immolation. Can you believe this rubbish? Iraq is teetering on the edge of futility, whatever that means. It will soon be time to effectively end Iraq. It will be time to radically diffuse authority to the only communities that are viable, the clan, tribal sect. And here is Ralph Peters in USA Today. He's a former US serviceman. He also believed the invasion was a good thing at the time. I was convinced that the Middle East was so politically, socially, morally, and intellectually stagnant that we had to risk intervention or face generations of terrorism and tumult. We got that afterwards, of course, in many cases. But, well, that's pretty much, that's what people said about the Ottoman Empire. And then he says, the country's prime minister has thrown in his lot with al-Sadr. The police are less accountable than they were under Saddam. Our extensive investment in Iraqi law enforcement produced only death squads. And then he says, only a military coup, which might come in the next few years, could hold this artificial country together. But we had a military coup. We supported Saddam. We had a military dictator. Then we executed him. Now we want another one. We did give Iraqis a unique chance to build a rule of law democracy. They preferred to indulge in old hatreds, confessional violence, ethnic bigotry, and a culture of corruption. These two articles appeared on the same day. Isn't it remarkable? And people get the government they deserve. It's their tragedy, not ours. Iraq was the Arab world's last chance to board the train to modernity. They could watch CNN. To give the region a future, not just a bitter past. And then he says, the violence staining Baghdad streets with gore is a symbol of the comprehensive inability of the Arab world to progress in any sphere of organized human endeavor. I'm quoting, this is the real thing. This is a real clipping. This isn't the internet. We are witnessing the collapse of a civilization. If they continue to revel in fratricidal slaughter, we must leave. And then, just in case you're feeling bad about this, we'll still be the greatest power on earth, indispensable to other regions and states, such as the Persian Gulf states and Saudi Arabia, watch out Saudi Arabia, that are terrified of Iran's growing might, you see. If the Arab world and Iran embark on an orgy of bloodshed, the harsh truth is that we may be the beneficiaries. So that's okay then. You see, this is the sort of pap that we are going to use as grit on the sand to allow our tank tracks to gain purchase and leave. They don't deserve us. We tried. We carried out the white man's burden, and they didn't want us, and more fool them, but we're still okay. That is going to be the story you get, and I get, less in Britain, but still there, because we've basically run away already, to get us out. And I go back to the same old terrible equation. We must leave, we will leave, and we can't leave. This is one way out. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't have much good or happy to say to you about journalism or about the future. If the surge has worked, it's only because the two major communities in Iraq, had already purged each other from each other's homes. It was over. Now we're in Afghanistan. Half of Afghanistan is back in the hands of the Taliban. You know, I was given by a very dear friend, this is the last thing I'm going to say before I finished here, the official British inquiry into the loss of British troops at Maiwand, which was a big battle at the end of the Victorian Age when we were trying to govern Afghanistan, protect the British Empire, of course. And what happened is that at one point the British grenadiers were firing in long lines. If you've seen the movie, I can't remember what it's called now, the movie about the Battle of Rorke's Drift with Michael Caine, you see the Zulu, it's called. You see the British troops firing, and then the next line gets up and fires. And in the annex to this official British report, big thick one with red leather covers and the gold still visible on the spine, there's a Captain Mannering who records how at the Battle of Maiwand there were some Afghans wearing black turbans who would choose a particular British soldier in the line, and even if they were cut down some of them would get through and seize this one man, pull him out, and cut his throat in front of the other British troops. And I read with astonishment when Captain Mannering, in this report of 1882, I think, said they were called the Taliban. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. If you